As the impeachment trial of President Trump nears an end, we'll talk about what it means in this election year and beyond. And will Governor Whitmer's Plan B be enough to smooth the roads and soothe the voters? We'll dig into the state of the state. Today is Sunday, February 2nd, 2020, and this is Flashpoint.
Happy Sunday morning, everybody. I'm Jason Colthorpe, and welcome to Flashpoint. Devin's off for the week. Closing arguments begin tomorrow in the Senate, and President Trump's acquittal is all but assured later this week. Right next door in the House, the president will deliver his third State of the Union address in a particularly charged political environment, although it seems like we say that every week now. We finally get some official numbers to count tomorrow as Iowans will head to the caucuses. It's the first time this group of candidates will be ranked in real life by real voters instead of in the polls. And just in case you forgot how important Michigan is for whoever plans to spend the next 4 years in the White House, we'll talk about the two big things that happened this week that could make the Great Lakes state the greatest state to take. It was also a week that saw the governor deliver her second State of the State address and her second promise to fix the roads. We'll break down her plan that is already in action. We'll also look at the other goals she set forth in her rather short 40-minute speech. We'll discuss all of that with our panel this morning and maybe get some Super Bowl predictions. It is Super Bowl Sunday. It all starts right now on Flashpoint. And again, happy Sunday, everybody. Happy Super Bowl Sunday and Groundhog Day. Joining me at the round table today, our former state senator and now with the Thomas Group Consulting, Buzz Thomas. Next to him is Tori Sachs, the executive director of Michigan Rising Action. Also, Zoe Clark is co-host of It's Just Politics on Michigan Radio. And Mike Bishop is, of course, former U.S. congressman. And before that, Michigan Senate Majority Leader in the State House. Guys, welcome.
Thank you. Happy Super Bowl Sunday.
Somebody mentioned we actually may have seen the sun on the way in this morning. What a day.
I can attest. I saw a giant bright orb.
I think I saw a shadow, but unlike the groundhog. Let's start off light with impeachment. We had the vote that this whole thing was building up to on Friday. It ended up being 51-49. No witnesses, no documents. What happened afterwards I thought was interesting. Senator Lamar Alexander said, and other senators said, he's kind of speaking for all of us on the Republican side and maybe a lot of America. We do think he did something wrong, but it's nothing to be impeached over. By virtue of the coin toss, Buzz, you won it backstage. There was no coin toss. But what do you think? Are they right? Should we be leaving this up to the voters at this stage?
No. What a joke this is. Senator Alexander, a very distinguished career, as he leaves office, says, you know, the Democratic leaders proved their case for Article 1, but this does not rise to a level of impeachment. I think it's a disaster for the institution of the Senate and very bad for the government of the United States of America. It's a horrible day, and the fact that we're all talking about that Wednesday will be a foregone conclusion, that the president will be acquitted of this in the Senate, the fact that we saw senators playing with little spinners or wearing khakis and reading things and not paying attention to the trial before them is a horrible moment for our country.
Mike, what did you think? Do you think this went the way it was going to the whole time? Was this a foregone conclusion?
The impeachment itself came to the Senate in a way that was unworkable. There was no way that the Senate was going to be able to have a functional trial with an indictment, is what it was, that did not produce any impeachable offense. Now, I think it's a joke, too. I think the House handled this incredibly bad. I think they've wasted a bunch of time that should have been spent on things that are important to this country and the future of this country. They have divided this country now to the point where I don't know how we get back. And they have set a precedent with impeachment that is dangerous for this president, but many presidents in the future. And I say to all of those out there who believe in this process, who have seen it and want it to go further, to be careful, because this can be applied to a future president by a future opposition party.
Zoe, what do you think?
I think we find ourselves in a historic moment, and yet I also think that when you're on the ground and talking to folks who are at the grocery store, who are pumping gas, this is not top of mind. I think when you are in a Washington bubble or focused, as the four of us around this table, as your guests are, every moment, every little bit of minutia we are focused on. But I think a lot of voters are ready to move on. A lot of voters are frustrating and see this as just one more step on the ladder of the chaos that they feel is coming out of D.C., whether you are for or against impeachment, acquittal, or removal, that a lot of folks just look at this as this is just one more reason of feeling like it is a circus in D.C.
And Tori, I want to get your thought on it too, but that also leads me into the next part of this, which is if you were advising the president, he's got a State of the Union coming up. Would you advise him to, hey, let's move it along, the voters are tired of this, or what would you say, what would you advise him to say in that situation?
I think the president is going to talk about the things that he's been doing. He was just here after he signed the USMCA, the best trade deal that we've seen in my lifetime for Michigan manufacturing, for Michigan farmers, for trade, for expanding, to continue the growth in the economy. Opioid overdoses are down. They've really been focused on those issues that we're talking about that people care about in Michigan, the tax cuts. And I do think I'd have him call out, and I'm sure he will, the charade that's been going on. Impeachment was a foregone conclusion when people like Rashida Tlaib got elected on impeaching the president, right? They went through four different scenarios that they tried to impeach him on. I think that was a foregone conclusion, and I think that people are going to be upset that Congress could have been working with the president on other things like lowering prescription drug costs instead of focusing on impeachment.
Yeah, we're going to talk a little bit more about Michigan in a second. Let's switch. Zoe, I want to bring you in on a different state, Iowa. We're finally going to get some actual votes, polls we can finally put aside a little bit.
And we have this weekend, after this sort of infamous, now likely in the history books, disaster of a polling with Pete Buttigieg, and we are now not going to have one last poll before Tuesday. So as we've been saying, let's leave it for the voters to see.
Is there one of the Democratic field that you think can survive a disastrous showing in Iowa and still stay in the race?
Oh my goodness. I mean, I think, if I would change the question. I'm going to be a politician. Sure. I'm going to still make Tyson pivot a little bit, which is who are the folks that can't, right? Amy Klobuchar, folks like that. I think it is still, in many views, a toss-up. And one of the most interesting things, of course, from Iowa is when you historically look, it doesn't always portend for who the candidate is going to be. We know Iowa is a very white state. Then you go to New Hampshire, that is a very independent state. Then you go to South Carolina. So depending on what happens in Iowa, I don't think anything is a foregone conclusion, but it can be more helpful to a candidate than it can hurt. And again, as someone like an Amy Klobuchar, a Pete Buttigieg who has talked so much about his ground game in Iowa, trying to kind of remodel the Obama ground game. If he doesn't come in the top three, it's going to be really difficult for him to continue.
Tough to make money that way. Right? What do you think about Iowa?
I think it's a great conversation starter. Iowa's notoriously known for not picking the right candidate ultimately, but it's a good conversation starter. And Iowa's great because it begins with the people. You talk to individuals, you have a chance to, every candidate can go talk to, they can literally talk to every single citizen of that state. Yeah. It's the way that process works. So I like that for that reason. But it is not an indicator of what's going forward. I think Bernie Sanders is going to win this thing, and it's going to be a shocker, but I really think he's going to win it. Do I think he's going to ultimately be the candidate? Probably not, but it's a conversation starter.
What do you think? What do you see happening in Iowa, Buzz?
Well, I don't think that, to Zoe's point, I don't think that this ends anyone's campaigns. I'm very intrigued to see how Vice President Biden does. I think he needs more so than Mayor Buttigieg, a stronger performance so that he doesn't lose his base. I think one of the big losers through impeachment was the Klobuchar campaign. Her campaign certainly seemed to have momentum brewing and now hasn't been able to campaign in Iowa. So she might get a do-over. If in fact that she doesn't come in fourth or fifth or third or better, folks will give her a chance to have a do-over and see what she does in New Hampshire. It's going to be fascinating. We've been talking about this for 18 months.
A long time, it feels like.
And so I'm really ready to get to election night on Monday and see the results.
Real numbers will be really nice to see, right, Tori?
They will, and I think the big takeaway for a lot of people is how far left the Democrats have pushed in Iowa, how far some people like Bernie Sanders have pulled the rest of the candidates, Biden, with them to the far left. And I think that'll be an interesting thing to see how that affects New Hampshire and South Carolina.
Isn't that always sort of the primary system in any election for Republicans or for Democrats, that, you know, the primaries pull sort of to the left or to the far right these days, and that's why you see folks becoming going to the left and right and then having to become more moderate in the middle in the general?
Well, I worked on Rick Snyder's first campaign in 2010, and he was very successful running to the middle.
Yeah, although he then split everyone else who was
But,
farther on the right.
This general election is ultimately, I think, going to be about who do people like more. And so I think it will be less about those issues of left and right, and generally who folks like, and are folks exhausted and tired and ready for a change.
Well, what is it? Republicans fall in line, Democrats fall in love.
Right.
We want to talk about Michigan as well, and we'll probably spill this into the next segment as well. But a couple of things happened this week that were big. They announced Governor Whitmer will deliver the State of the Union rebuttal, and immediately President Trump came back to Michigan again. Is that a big deal, Mike?
I don't think the two are connected at all. I think the president came back to Michigan because he understands how important the USMCA is to this state, and this new trade deal is a fantastic trade deal. It's so good that I think they'll use it as a template going forward for other trade deals. My hat's off to Ambassador Lighthizer and that whole trade team for putting together an incredible deal that will be great, not only for our country, but especially for the state of Michigan. So I'm glad that the president came back, and I think he came back because he recognizes that it is and will have a huge impact on our state.
Buzz, I'm hearing that's the second time I've heard it's not really a big deal that the governor's giving the rebuttal. Is it not?
Absolutely it is. It's a national platform for Michigan. I think it highlights how important Michigan is to the calculus of who will become the next president. And I mean, we have to remember that President Trump won Michigan by a little under 11,000 votes. So this puts a bright, shiny spotlight onto our state and to our issues, and it gives our chief executive an opportunity to highlight some of the things that she's working on and some of the things that are priorities for Democrats. So it's a wonderful thing, and I think it does guarantee that Michigan will be there at the final bell deciding who the next president is.
Tori, we're always important, but does it make Michigan even more important because of these events?
I think Michigan's important because Donald Trump focused on Michigan in 2016 and Hillary Clinton didn't. It's interesting to see that the Democrats have learned from that. But I think that people are going to have buyer's remorse at the national level when they realize that Governor Whitmer hasn't really accomplished anything, right? She ran her whole campaign on roads. She gets in her first term and doesn't even put a plan forward that her fellow Democrats in the House can support, right? So she kind of had to go it alone, really take out credit cards. Our state's future, we're going to be paying interest on this, you know, we're going to get $3.5 billion in roads, and we're going to pay about $5 or $6 billion for it. That's not a plan, right? They're not putting somebody forward who has accomplishments, who has a bipartisan accomplishment to talk about. So I think they're going to have buyer's remorse.
We're going to talk about roads and get the rest of the governor's State of the State address when we come back. By the way, a little fact on the way out, the last Democrat to give the State of the Union rebuttal, Carl Levin, 1984. There you go. From Michigan, that is. We'll be right back.